Catherine Mazur from SWRCB. Most of you know me, but if not, I look forward to meeting you over the next couple of days. We're about to have a session of a series of talks that I'm very excited to actually get a chance to share with you. California has really been at the lead of the entire nation in terms of grappling with the challenge of trying to manage and monitor a watershed when you only have flow in a certain portion of it. Many of our streams are intermittent or ephemeral, and that can create major challenges when most of the tools you have to assess them are really geared towards perennial streams. You're going to hear 3 talks about different strategies for really grappling with this challenge. Again, I think we really are on the cutting edge of this. So we're going to first hear from Karen Wisenbaker of ABC Labs, who will tell us a little bit about the San Gabriel River Regional Monitoring Program. This is a program that's been around for quite some time. It's really one of the first major comprehensive watershed programs, certainly in California, if not in the US. It's really got a great history, but they're coming to the point where they're really starting to struggle with these gaps created by ignoring their intermittent streams, and she'll talk to you about that. Dan Pickard from Fish and Wildlife Aquatic Bioassessment Lab, he'll tell you about a new monitoring program on the Channel Islands. And finally, you'll hear from Savannah Pena. She's a recent graduate from Cal State University in Monterey Bay, and she'll be sharing sort of a new tool to use in our ephemeral streams, where some of these strategies that Dan and Karen are talking about, it would really, you'll see probably how they all fit together. So with that, I'm going to let Karen take a start. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm excited to be here today talking to you about perennial and non-perennial streams in the San Gabriel River watershed. The San Gabriel River watershed is located in Southern California. The majority of which is in Los Angeles County. However, there is a small section. Oh, it just stopped working. Let me use this one. There is a small section in Orange County. The watershed is 689 square miles. There are approximately 2 million people living in this watershed, and 54% of this is undeveloped, and that's mostly in the upper watershed in the San Gabriel Mountains. And the San Gabriel Mountains are really steep mountains that can be rather inaccessible. So unfortunately, we're not able to get to all of these tributaries. So the San Gabriel River Regional Monitoring Program development began in 2004, and this program was a direct response to LA County Sanitation District, LA Department of Public Works, and Orange County Public Works NPDES permit requirements. The LA Regional Water Quality Control Board desired more information about the watershed as a whole. Before this sampling program began, monitoring wasn't coordinated, and sampling occurred mostly at targeted sites in the lower watershed. So when this program was developed, over a lot of individuals from over a dozen agencies formed a technical stakeholder group. And they developed 5 monitoring questions, including what is the health of streams in the watershed, what are conditions at areas of unique importance, is it safe to swim, and is it safe to eat fish? And by addressing these 5 questions, we had a much better understanding of the watershed as a whole. We also broke the watershed into 3 subpopulations. So we have the mostly undeveloped upper watershed, where creeks tend to be natural. We have the lower watershed tributaries. The majority of those creeks are modified, most of which are hardened, some of which are unlined. And then there's the San Gabriel River main stem. The majority of the main stem is completely hardened and has a low flow channel. So question 1, what is the health of the streams in the watershed? This is an ambient water quality monitoring program, and samples were collected between 2005 and 2016. Samples were collected at over 100 probabilistic sites, and we sampled at sites that were perennial. We did not include non-perennial streams in this survey. To assess the ambient condition, we looked at multiple lines of evidence. So this included using the swamp bioassessment protocol to collect benthic macroinvertebrates and benthic algae at 11 transects. We also wanted to determine the condition of physical habitat. So of course there's a physical habitat component of the bioassessment. We also conducted, we also used the California Rapid Assessment Method to calculate the wetland habitat scores at the sites, these riverine sites. And finally, we collected water for chemistry analysis and also water for toxicity analysis. And by looking at these multiple lines of evidence, we were able to assess ambient condition in the watershed. So we knew, we kind of had a strong grasp of what the ambient condition is after 11 years of monitoring. So the technical stakeholder group, we decided that we wanted to have a program redesign. We knew we had some knowledge gaps. For example, how does ambient stream condition change over time? With a probabilistic design where we're sampling at new random sites each year, it could take decades to determine how the streams change over time. We also were curious about how management practices or natural phenomena affect stream condition over time. And finally, we wanted to know about the health of non-perennial streams in our watershed. So we made some changes to question 1. We decided that we would go back and re-sample sites starting in 2008. This way we could still determine the ambient condition of our watershed while also comparing the revisit sites, looking at the older data versus the newer data so that we could assess changes. And finally, we also were looking at the condition of non-perennial streams in the watershed. It's not a big surprise. Over half of Southern California's stream miles are non-perennial. The San Gabriel watershed, we have about a quarter of our watershed stream miles are non-perennial. So for this talk, again, I'm mostly going to be focused on questions 1 and 2. So how did we decide to determine the condition of the non-perennial streams? We decided to take a tiered approach. We know during the bioassessment index period, most of these, or quite a few of these non-perennial streams would be dry. So at these dry sites, we would still be able to conduct CRAM assessment. If there's limited flow, meaning the creeks, the flow was going dry, but maybe you had some disconnected glides or pools where we would collect water and sediment for chemistry analysis, as well as the CRAM assessment. And finally, at sites where we were lucky enough to find flow at, we could also include bioassessment sampling. So to select these non-perennial stream sites, we went back to our recon list starting in 2008, and we selected sites that were rejected due to lack of flow. And we're selecting 5 non-perennial sites per year. So this program just began, and I do have some limited data to show you. On the left of the screen, you'll see this map. These are the sites where we collected, where we conducted our non-perennial stream surveys. You'll notice, if you can see the dots clearly, they are all in the lower watershed. Unfortunately, we did not get any sites in the upper watershed. That may be because, again, we started this in 2008, 2009. During those years, there was a lot of water in the upper watershed, so we had better success up there. The color codes on the dots, down on the bottom right-hand side of this map, those indicate CRAM scores. These sites were all dry when we went out to sample them, so we were only able to conduct CRAM assessments. The red dots are below reference condition, and the green dots are above reference condition. And we have one site, let's see if I can find it. Oh, there it is. With the green dot, that site is in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountain, and it's a lot different than our normal lower watershed sites. It's definitely a natural flow and high gradient stream. So I wanted to compare these results to our perennial sites where we collected as part of question 1 during the same time period. And one thing to note, the CRAM scores are pretty similar. And these CRAM scores are similar to what we normally see in the lower watershed. Of course, we have one site. This red line indicates reference scores, and these are CRAM scores here on the y-axis. This one site is that site in the San Gabriel foothills that was above reference. So because we didn't have any flowing sites where we could have, where I could show you CSCI scores, I decided to take a look at sites that were sampled between 2008 and 2012. Some of the sites that we originally thought were perennial are actually non-perennial. So I was able to pull out those sites and compare them to sites that were sampled during the same time period. So on the right, this box plot right here, those are CRAM scores. On the left. On the right, these are CSCI scores. And I chose all upper watershed sites since they were natural, and a lot of the lower watershed sites were concrete lined during this time period. And again, you'll see for the CRAM scores, they're all above reference condition. And that's what, these are the scores that we usually see in the upper watershed. This is no surprise. As far as the CSCI scores, that's the California Stream Condition Index, and this index is calculated by looking at benthic macroinvertebrate communities. These sites are all above reference, again. So we're not seeing, with this limited data set, we're not seeing a big difference between non-perennial and perennial streams in the San Gabriel River watershed. Okay, so now I'm going to move on and talk about question 2, areas of unique importance. So question 2, we have collected samples from 2005 to 2016 at 8 freshwater sites and 3 estuary sites. I'm going to be talking about the freshwater sites. Those freshwater sites were sampled, and we used multiple lines of evidence, similar to what we did in question 1, to assess the condition of these sites over time. So we had a lot of data, and we felt like we had a lot of data about these sites and understood how they changed over time. So during the program redesign, we decided to select new trend sites. So to do this, we reviewed this probabilistic site sample from 2008 to 2016. A lot of times what we did was we compared biotic conditions to physical habitat conditions. So for example, if we had a site with very high CSCI scores and very high CRAM scores, we knew the site was pristine and we didn't want it to degrade over time. We also looked at sites that had high CSCI scores but low CRAM scores and vice versa. We also reviewed sites where regulatory programs were underway. And finally, we selected 7 sites to sample annually for at least 5 to 10 years. So these were the sites that we selected. I want to point out 2 of those sites. This site is in Marshall Canyon, and that's technically in the lower watershed. However, it's a natural creek, and it's also a high gradient stream. And then I want to point out this site over here. This is the West Fork San Gabriel River. And this site is kind of behind Mount Wilson. And it's a pristine site that's very hard for the public to access unless you have a U.S. Forest Service keys and can drive down to it. So when the program redesign began in 2017, the site was flowing. When we went back to it in 2018, this site had limited flow. We weren't expecting that, but luckily we had done the program redesign regarding non-perennial streams, so in our back pocket we said, well, let's go ahead and sample at this site and conduct a CRAM assessment. It had limited flow, so we were able to collect water chemistry samples. This year, when we went back to it, it was flowing again, so we were able to measure all indicators. So I wanted to pull out some data for this site. On the left, these are CRAM scores. Again, the red line indicates whether these scores are above or below reference. And once again, whether or not there was limited flow or it was flowing, these sites were all above reference condition. So I had CSCI score data. So looking at these CSCI scores, these are much higher CSCI scores than we usually see in the lower watershed for the San Gabriel program. But that's because, again, this is a high gradient stream and its flow is natural. So the reference condition for CSCI is 0.79, and these are well above that. We also have the algal IBI, I was about to say the H2O, excuse me, the H20. And again, this is an index that looks at benthic algal communities, and it includes soft-bodied algae and diatoms. These scores are lower than reference condition. And then I pulled out some of the chemistry, the nutrient results from this site. These numbers are similar to what you would see in the lower watershed, which sort of surprised me. I would expect this site to have lower total nitrogen and total phosphorus. And you do see, again, this is limited data. We are seeing a kind of increase over time, but I don't know if that's going to continue or not. But I think these nutrients concentrations are higher because, if you remember before, this creek has a lot of leaf litter and organic debris. And finally, I have the West Fork San Gabriel River. Again, this is a pristine site. In 2013, when we originally sampled it, it was flowing. When we went back in 2018, it had limited flow again. And so, again, this is the West Fork San Gabriel River CRAM scores. You can see right here, these CRAM scores, whether or not there was limited flow or it was flowing, are above reference condition. And I pulled out the same, these are the same from the table at Marshall Creek. The CSCI scores, you can see they're really high. So that's why we want to go back to these sites to make sure it doesn't degrade over time. We only have one algal IBI score. In 2013, the soft body portion was not analyzed, but this is above reference condition, which is greater than 57. And again, I have total nitrogen and total phosphorus results. These are much lower than Marshall Creek, but they're similar to what we see in the upper watershed. So the San Gabriel River Regional Monitoring Program is going to continue monitoring 5 non-perennial sites per year to determine ambient condition. We are going to continue monitoring the perennial and non-perennial sites at trend sites to determine temporal trends. And then finally, this is an adaptive monitoring program. So we're able to adapt this program based on monitoring success and results. And we will be able to update the sampling design as new indicators are developed. Oops. At this time, I would like to give a big thanks to our current technical stakeholder group. And if you'd like more information about this program, please go to SGRRMP.org, and all of the data is available on this website as well. Thank you.
So the high nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus at Marshall Canyon.
Yes.
Could that also, were there fires near there in the recent past? And I'm just wondering if that's possible.
No.
Okay.
No, not really. The station fire was west of there. And I don't believe there was any fires directly above the city of Laverne at that time. Yeah. Not recent, at least.
Did you make any attempt to identify the cause of the disturbance when you chose your seasonal streams? And I could elaborate on that.
Yeah, could you elaborate?
Yeah, for example, one example comes to mind is agricultural pumping, or a better example might be, exact example would be Fernald, which was a Department of Energy plant in the Midwest. It was 1,000 acres with about 50 acres of industry. The stream going into that plant was Patty's Run, and it was a perennial stream. Patty's Run going out of the plant was just a dry arroyo most of the year.
was it? So are you referring to question 2 or trend sites that we're looking at? Or just the non-perennial stream site selection
But
in
did you
general?
identify whether it was agricultural pumping, some kind of pumping?
Oh.
For instance, fracking can raise the stream level, turn a seasonal stream into a perennial stream.
Yeah, in the San Gabriel River watershed, there's not much agriculture there. So I do know that, that wouldn't be a factor in that. The one site with high nutrients upstream, that's generally all natural. There's lots of hiking trails where people horseback ride and things like that. Yeah, so I think, when we were selecting the trend sites and we were looking at regulatory actions, there's one site that we decided, a targeted site, we decided to continue sampling because there's a TMDL associated with it. So, we did look for, specific areas where there was sort of regulatory action taking place, but go ahead.
In this watershed, most of the non-perennial streams are naturally, historically non-perennial, so it's not that there's pumping causing them to dry up. So,
Sorry.
yeah.
For these non-perennial streams, I assume intermittent, and then follow-up question would be, have you considered when you're sampling it on those days when they were wet or when they were flowing water in it, have you considered or tried to estimate or guesstimate the number of days that has been wet or since the last major precipitation events?
We do have information about the last precipitation events that we collect from, I believe, USGS data. One thing that we might want to do is add water depth sensors at some of those sites so that we have a better understanding. Actually, we have had depth sensors at the West Fork site. And when we had it out there, as I recall, it tended to dry up in late July. But I believe it was, we had a few years of extreme drought, and that included 2018, and it dried up in the middle of July. And unfortunately, at this point, we can't sample it any sooner because of arroyo toads, so we need to wait till July until toads tadpoles are out of the water.
Could be an advice, but there was a attempt to use a really low, so it's basically the electronic sensors when it was wet. It makes a connection in the circuit, and then it gives you the number of days or the day that begin the closed circuit, which is actually the day it gets wet, and then when it dries up, it disconnected. So it gives you an idea of the duration of the wet period, and then it gives you an idea when it was wet on your sampling date as well. So I think it was about $50 per sensor, something like that.
Nice.
So if you want to, talk about that, that's another possibility.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good sampling device to use. Thank you.